phones or to silence them. There we go. I am very pleased that we've had such a good turnout tonight for what every American needs to know. I want to thank the Aspen Institute who selected us. We're one of 7 libraries in the country to do this pilot project, and we're also only the 3rd library to do it, the first being Denver and the second being Topeka. I also want to thank the League of Women Voters who, as soon as I called and asked if they would be a partner in this, they jumped up and said yes. And to WNPR, because they were actually recording this tonight, so we're very excited about that. In prior programs leading up to this, we worked with the Urban League, 100 Black Men, and in an upcoming project that we'll be doing starting in next week is a public art on what every American should know, and we're working with Franklin Street Works, and we're very excited about that as well. We live in a diverse community. I love Stanford. Where else can you get Ethiopian food at TEF? You can get fantastic Indian food at Tawa, and I haven't even left the tea restaurants yet. There are more than 65 languages represented in our schools. In my street alone, which I think of a little microcosm of Stanford, we have all the major religions represented. And yet, the Muslim family that lives on my corner has instructed their children not to tell anyone about their religion or that they are Muslim. When we host our Community Catalyst conversations, we hear from the community members that they are proud of Stanford's diversity. But we've also heard from new Americans as well as millennials that have just moved to Stanford that the experience here can be lonely, that it isn't always welcoming. It is sometimes easier to connect to our peers on Facebook rather than to meet new friends in Stanford. But we all want that sense of belonging to our neighborhood, to our city, to our country. The What Every American Should Know initiative was created to explore how we can find common purpose, that common bound, that sense of belonging. In 1987, E.D. Hirsch published Cultural Literacy, What Every American Needs to Know. The book was written from Hirsch's education theorist perspective and talked about the necessity of a common knowledge in learning. He also, at the end of the book, he and his collaborators included an appendix, a 63-page alphabetical list of 5,000 subjects and concepts that they thought every American should know. Well, he didn't know it, but he just walked into the center of the cultural wars. It just so happened that the moment the book and its index had arrived was rife with national anxiety. And conservatives embraced Hirsch, saying he was a defender of American history. Liberals attacked him, saying he was retrograde, Eurocentric, racist, even sexist. Thus began a debate not only over the list itself, but over the need for common knowledge. A generation later, Eric Liu, director of the Citizenship and American Identity program of the Aspen Institute, picked the book up again. He wrote about it in How to Be an American, an essay for the Democracy Journal. He wrote that E.D. Hirsch wasn't wrong, and that the part he was right about is now more urgent than ever. In a nation as far-flung as ours, where we are experiencing unprecedented inequality and incredible demographic flux, we need a common basis that allows us, an ever more diverse society, to hold together. But the common knowledge shouldn't come from just one person. The common knowledge must be as diverse and as inclusive as possible, and it should come from all of us. And that is where What Every American Should Know was born. We are going to crowdsource for Stanford what we think every American should know. And we will briefly, as we go over tonight, I'm going to introduce you to Carrie Hopper from the Aspen Institute, but we're going to go over briefly just the topic of what every American should know. We'll listen to our expert panelists discuss this topic in the context of our own community, and then we'll open up the conversation to get everyone's ideas. Finally, we'll come back together as a large group to report back what we discussed, and we then invite you to join the conversation online by submitting your list to What Every American Should Know. And if you tweet, to tweet it on #WeAsk. Carrie Hopper has been working with us since late May, I believe, and she's an associate at the Aspen Institute's Citizenship and American Identity program. And I would like to ask her to come up and talk a little bit about what her work is.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you to the Ferguson Library and to WNPR News and to the League of Women Voters of Stamford for your partnership. It's been so much fun in these months. This age of increasing diversity and widening inequality that Alice laid out for us gives rise to what is certainly a challenge, but it is also an opportunity, and that is to redefine what it means to be an American today, as we're seeing that the prominent American identity of the past really no longer fits us, and perhaps it never did. But how are we supposed to do that? How can we cultivate this sense of common civic purpose? And how can we do it in a way that is truly participatory and that reflects and celebrates our true diversity in our new America? So today's program is really in the spirit of those questions, and these are the questions at the heart of the entire What Every American Should Know initiative. A generation has passed since E.D. Hirsch published Cultural Literacy, but unfortunately in that time we have experienced enormous cultural fragmentation. We can feel this in so many ways in our everyday lives. You don't have to look much further than our presidential election to know what I'm talking about. And what this is really telling us is that it's time for us to revisit these ideas of civic and cultural literacy. Because the more fragmented that we become, the more necessary it is for us to have a foundation of common knowledge, a shared set of cultural and historical references that we can all collect and understand. When we can understand this vocabulary, we can truly better understand one another. And we can encounter each other in our own shared communities and better understand each other's part of that shared community. When we're able to accomplish this, so many doors will open. We're able to claim voice and power as citizens, and we can support each other as we do so. Eric Liu, who Alice mentioned, leads the program at the Aspen Institute that created this What Every American Should Know initiative, said in his essay that being American should mean being part of a common culture that is even greater than the sum of our increasingly diverse parts. So then being civically and culturally literate means understanding and appreciating the value and the context of all of those many parts, even when they're not our own. So now our challenge and our opportunity is to do two things. The first is that we have to update this common knowledge, what we are calling the list of what every American should know, to reflect our diverse society. The list ought to contain things that are important not just for elite Americans, but for any American. And the second is to make this entire endeavor as intentionally inclusive as possible. The list is not a set of items that is prescribed by one person to everyone else. The list should truly belong to all of us. So we've invited people from around the country to submit lists of 10 things, names, dates, terms, phrases, concepts, that they think every American ought to know in order to navigate American life. As thousands of ideas have come in from across the country and from across the political spectrum, a collective national list of what every American should know is emerging. And that's exactly why we're here tonight, to ask, what do you think that every American should know? And I know that in the days and weeks leading up to this event, you've been asked to start thinking about what 10 things would you include on your list of what every American should know. And tonight we'll have more time to talk about your ideas. And after this event, I really hope that you'll submit your ideas at whateveryamericanshould.know.org in order to join this national conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
So now I'm just going to quickly introduce our panelists. Some of them really need no introduction, like our mayor. Mayor Martin has served as Stamford's mayor since 2013, prior to which he represented the city's 19th district on the Board of Reps for 26 years. David has made valuable contributions to the several community and city boards on which he served. These include the Stamford Police Foundation, Stamford Emergency Medical Services, which he helped form, the Stamford Investment Advisory Committee, and the Stamford Partnerships Executive Committee. He and his wife Judy have lived here for over 30 years. They found Stamford to be a city that offered a diverse population, the opportunity for professional growth, a great place to raise a family, and most importantly, the chance to become involved in the community and make a difference. Superintendent Earl Kim became superintendent of Stamford Public Schools in July 2016 after serving most recently as head of school, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Kamehameha Schools, Kapalama. And
Kamehameha, but that was good.
Yeah. How did you say it?
Kamehameha.
Kamehameha. And prior to that, as superintendent of schools in the Montgomery and Verona townships in New Jersey from 2003 to 2012. Mr. Kim served in the Marines as a commissioned lieutenant for 4 years, after which he graduated from Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, Princeton University, with a Master of Public Affairs degree. Mr. Kim has earned the following awards and recognitions: New Jersey Best Practices, New Jersey School Board of Association, New Jersey Star Schools, National Blue Ribbon Schools, and New Jersey Principal of the Year. Stephen Napier is an attorney who specializes in the areas of estate and tax planning, trust and estate administration, and business succession planning at Ivy Barnum and Amara, a law firm with offices in Greenwich, New Canaan, and Manhattan. Stephen also serves on the board of directors and as chair of the Young Professionals Group for Inspirica, a Stanford-based charity that focuses on breaking the cycle of homelessness in Fairfield County. Stephen is also a member of the Greenwich Chamber of Commerce. Wendy Scratt volunteers as the president of the League of Women Voters of Stanford, a nonprofit, nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. She is also manager of communications and events for Stanford World Affairs Forum, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to educating, inspiring, and engaging our community in international affairs and the critical global issues of our time. Anka Baderna joined Neighbors Link in 2015 to research, design, and develop training programs to accelerate the economic integration of adult immigrants into the local workforce. Anka has worked in leadership roles in public institutions and international organizations in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. She has a PhD in cultural anthropology, is multilingual, and has a unique understanding of different cultures, having lived in Venezuela, Mexico, the United States, Canada, Japan, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Michael Hyman. Since 2009, Michael Nyman has led the Domus Chester Addison Center, a vibrant community hub dedicated to inspiring the social, emotional growth and well-being of our youth. One of the center's many priorities, which also includes offering after-school activities and literacy classes. Michael has over 20 years of experience in progressive management and leadership positions in corporate America, during which time he served as president of the Stanford NAACP and member of the Connecticut NAACP board. He is currently the vice president of programs for the 100 Black Men of Stanford and sits on the board of several other community organizations serving young youth and families. Michael, his wife, and daughters are longtime residents of Stanford. And David DeRoche, our moderator. David covers education and related topics for WNPR and also mentors high school seniors who attend the Journalism and Media Academy Magnet School in Hartford as part of the Connecticut Public Broadcasting's Learning Lab initiative. David comes to public media after a career in newspapers, where he received over a dozen state, regional, and national awards for his work, including twice being named New England's Reporter of the Year in 2013 and 2014. He was also included in Connecticut Magazine's 40 Under 40 list in 2015. A native of Central Virginia, David's special education reporting in Darien, Connecticut, has been cited as one of the most comprehensive explorations of disability rights among children in the United States. He often contributes to journalism seminars focused on education, investigation, and First Amendment issues. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to David.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Carrie. What drew me to this was certainly the idea that knowledge and culture have changed so much in the past 20 years, just from the advent of the internet. For years, the power structures have dictated what we know. Now, knowledge is free, not in the monetary sense, but in the liberation sense. It's out there. Knowledge can be found anywhere. And just a quick correction, the Ethiopian restaurant is pronounced Tev, but I won't hold that against you. I spent a year in Ethiopia, and that was actually one of the most eye-opening experiences for me, and probably why part of the reason why I agreed to do this panel. So in case people don't know, did everybody raise their hand when she was introducing you guys so we all know who everybody is? No. Okay, so at the end we have Stephen. So there will be a test later, so make sure we remember the names. Stephen, and then, forgive me because I just met everybody. Wendy, Mayor David, Earl Kim, Michael Hyman, and Anka, whose last name? Badurina. All right, so my goal is to have just a conversation. So Anka, I'm going to start with you since you're sitting next to me. This idea of civic and cultural literacy, what does that mean to you? How would you define civic and cultural literacy?
And can I do it? Can I do it in the context of what I do?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I work for Neighbors Link, which is a community-based organization that serves the immigrant community of the area. And our mission actually is strengthen the community through the healthy integration of immigrants. And the way we do this is in two things: helping the immigrants learn the values and the culture of the new community, but it's also helping and engaging the community to learn the values and the culture of the new residents. And I also, again, she was explaining before, I've been working with communities in different parts, so in that sense, I look at these concepts very inclusively. So I think when I think about culture and civic literacy, I think it has to be in that sense that you have to engage the community, not only with the people you work in case immigrants, but the whole community. So everybody actually learns what civic and culture means in the context of diversity, and not so much only for our silos that we tend to be in. I believe for that diversity makes us all better, and we make the world a better place when we understand, when we respect other cultures, when we communicate with, and when we learn from people that are different to us. And in that sense, overwhelmingly in Neighbors Link, our clients want to become American citizens. So we provide ESL classes or ESL citizenship classes. So we teach them U.S. Civics and U.S. history, and we want them to learn about this. But we also have, again, coming to this engagement, we also have lots of volunteers. We have over 500 volunteers that through the interactions, the formal and informal interactions with our clients, makes this cultural awareness more broad. So it's not only in our center, but also we're bringing this awareness of diversity outside our worlds, the walls of our center. And I think it's in that sense, for example, in the skills development program that I lead, we run a series of workshops on cultural awareness and effective communications, because we believe that if people understand, if we increase the ability of people to understand and communicate and interact with different cultural groups, it's going to be much better for everyone. So, and we have, again, for me, it's dual, in the sense of the clients we serve, but also in the community as a whole. We have to make this engagement that we all participate in this diversity. So for me, when we strengthen these interactions with the whole community, is when you have, when you strengthen at the same time the civic and cultural literacy meaning, in a way. You have to be more inclusive. You have to bring all the parts.
Can I move to Superintendent Kim? She mentioned civic literacy or U.S. history, but the importance to kind of expand on that in civics classes. Could you explain your thoughts on that, running a school district? How important is it for you to have a more diverse cultural history in government in the schools that you're running?
Well, I think that the more that students are exposed to while they're young, the more open they are to different ideas, different systems, values, culture, and the like. So I think that's all a good thing, and I do appreciate the work that Neighbors Link does in not just helping immigrants to become acculturated to the norms of the U.S., but also to help us in the community to better understand and value all that these children, in this case of schools, bring to our classrooms. They bring immense experience, values. I was talking to a student the other day, or just as school was beginning, who had crossed the border over the summer alone to rejoin his family who was already here. And to me, it's just shocking that a 15-year-old would do something like that, would make that trek at that great a risk. I'm putting together the story as he's telling me this in a few words of English and a lot of sign language. I can only imagine what he'll be able to add to the classrooms when he's able to share that, whether it's pictorially or ultimately verbally and in writing. So I think it's a great thing that Neighbors Link does for our community. As far as the schools go, yes, acculturation is a part of what we do, so the study of U.S. history is important. More important, I think, is the understanding of the role of the schools within our democracy. That, for me, is the starting point, that under our Constitution, there is an idea that is America, that's shaped by that document, and that we have a responsibility to prepare our students to be successful in the world that Constitution has created. The ability to interact with others, the ability to understand other perspectives, to collaborate with others and come up with solutions to really complex problems that our country faces. That's the role of the schools within this cultural context, this democratic republic, which means a great deal for the kind of curriculum that we offer and the pedagogy that we use. And we're by no means perfect. I imagine many would say we're far from it. But I know that our staff is wrestling with those ideas. It's not a new idea. Probably the most often quoted but least read philosopher of education and democracy, John Dewey, said it best, that we need to provide our students with the kinds of experience, not didactic instruction, but the kinds of experience that allow them to produce, to create, to be a part of the society in which they'll eventually matriculate. And that's a very different kind of curriculum and pedagogy than I certainly grew up with. And our teachers are tasked with that humongous responsibility. And you layer on top of that some additional responsibilities. That now they not only have to serve students who are heading to our Ivy League universities, but students who have just landed in the United States 2 months ago, and bring them up to that same level of ability and understanding so that they feel comfortable interacting in that society. Just a year later in some cases, because some come to us as seniors. So that's the role of the schools. It is in part acculturation, but there's a fine line between that and indoctrination, where we replace the culture and values that the child brings to our schools. Again, something that is of immense value to us. Erase it and supplant it with a culture that we think is the dominant culture of the United States. That's not where we seek to go as a school system, and we're continually conscious of that in the work that we do. There are other purposes of schools, and I think that if there's one thing that I can offer to the community, that would be one thing that Americans need to know, is that these purposes that for schools that have been around since the first school was founded, since the first interaction between a parent and a child, are part of an immortal conversation that we have to be a part of in every generation. And the answer that we come up with to the question of what is the purpose of school is unique to every generation. But if we don't participate in the conversation, and it is our conversation, then the schools become something unrecognizable and undesirable. So there's the original notion of the school as a purpose of learning for learning's sake, pure intellectualism. There is the notion of the purpose of schools as preparing students not for school but for life, so sort of an instrumental role. There's the notion of schools as improving the economic well-being of the individual or being a primary element of economic growth in this country and the well-being or the quality of life of all the people in our country. There's the notion of schools as the instrument or vehicle for societal improvement, that we are somehow a major force in shaping that democracy that results when our students become adults. And then finally, that notion of acculturation. Now, I don't have the answer to that question by myself. That's a community responsibility, a shared vision that we will have for our schools someday, soon. But I leave it to the audience that one thing every American should know is the answer to the question of what is the purpose of our schools is an answer that all of us have to own.
I have to say, Superintendent Kim did not have prior access to that question. I just asked him out of the blue, and he knocked it out of the park. So thank you for that. I hope people feel that they can be honest and open, and we're going to have discussions later. So, take some notes and try to engage as much as possible. Michael, you and I talked earlier today, and your list was very fascinating to me. I think it was very justice-oriented, I believe. Tell me, in your sense, this idea of civic and cultural literacy in the context of what you think is valuable for citizens to know.
I can.
And try, if everybody can speak into the microphone, because I'm not sure if everybody can hear. Can you guys hear in the back okay? Okay, so if we can try to speak directly, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. Is this good? All right. I'd love to answer your question, but can I take a moment to say that I was also pleased with Dr. Kim's answer, and that he would quote John Dewey, who everyone knows as far as education is concerned is probably the go-to guy. And Dewey, what it reminded me of was that he also said that learning begins, the best learning begins, when we realize that the solutions that we find during comfort are inadequate. The solutions that we find during comfort are often inadequate. And the idea that schools are a part of all that we do. My context, obviously, is with a community center. And so that I deal with children in an after-school setting, but I also deal with families and children and seniors and others who are just simply active in a community. And civically, it is so necessary that for those individuals who use the places that I know of as Chester Addison or the old Yearwood Center, or whether it's some other community center in some other far-flung part of this country, many of them, people of color, that this is a touch point for them. This is a place of community where they come to, and for those of us who lead those types of places, it's important for us to realize that and to add more than making it just simply a recreation center. And so the more involves ensuring that there are some connection points that validate the community. The mayor is here with us tonight, but if I were at the Chester Addison Center, there are occasions when he walks through the doors there. That's a validation of that particular community that may not see a mayor from time to time, but that his coming validates that they are worthy of the same rights, respect that other parts of our community would be accorded. That goes for the police chief, also for the principals of the schools. But to get those individuals there and to get them to understand that these are people too, that they have the same dreams, hopes, that others have all across this community. Sometimes we don't notice that. And another thing that Dr. Kim mentioned was the idea that a young man who was coming to this country, and I guess maybe a few months ago or a year ago, the idea that he is on a journey. Well, there are people who are resident of our community today who are on a journey as well. And that journey involves telling their stories about where they've been, where they're going, what their dreams are. And often those things are swept aside or not noticed or not told in many instances. I can certainly say that from my own background and upbringing that my journey was not in the history books that I read as a child, and that America in many ways was too afraid or had other reasons for not telling that part of the story, so that it disenfranchised individuals not only from the voting booths, but it disenfranchised them from the legacy of what is America, and it created that yearning that is the American dream that people of color strive so hard for.
I'd like to move to Mayor Martin, since you mentioned you're visiting. Is validation, this idea of validation for communities that might not receive validation either through mainstream media or through the school system, how important is it for you to be a part of that process of ensuring that various communities feel like that they're validated and valued?
I actually don't know how important that is, but I wrote that down when Michael said that. About a year and a half ago or so, I was invited to a Yale University summit, Yale Business School summit that they hold in New York, and they invite 15 mayors from around the country, and Stamford in Connecticut gets invited, and they invite CEOs and leaders and some of the people you see on CNBC every morning are invited, and it's a very rich discussion. But they had a panel discussion with the various mayors, and they were talking about some of the challenges around diversity and the response by police or about the community leaders or the schools that had been happening in some of these other communities. And none of them have the diversity that Stamford has. They're not even close. They are significant cities. You would recognize every one of them, but they don't have our diversity. And my commentary was that I go to event after event after event, and various pieces of our community, components of our community. And a lot of politicians do that because, oh, gee, I want to see my face and I'll get some votes because they know I've been there. And that's not a bad reason. But I said there, and Michael is right, and I do this for this reason. I want every component of the community to know that I know that they are part of this community. It isn't just that they are welcome as if they are outsiders. No, they are part of the community. And I represent them, and the government works for them just as much as it works for anybody else. When Michael said that, I wrote it down because I believe it is important. I don't know what else to say. But I will tell you, I've gone to see the Ukrainians and the Coptic Christians and the Guatemalans,
and the immigrants,
Ecuadorians and the Peruvians and the Italian Americans and the Irish and the Polish, and the list goes on and on and on. And every world event, there's somebody in Stamford that's impacted by it. And when Trump makes statements about Muslims, we have to have a community meeting in a mosque here in Stamford to reassure the Muslim community that that's not the way that we see it here. And we have to have a community event at Neighbors Link when we're talking about that. And some parents are concerned about pulling their kids out of the schools because of what is the national direction that's going on here. And when there's a hurricane in Haiti, There are events going on in Stamford to support the Haitian community, or an earthquake in Ecuador, an earthquake in Bangladesh. We have a Syrian refugee family in this community. I don't make a big deal of it. I'm not announcing it. I don't believe that they need their privacy invaded. But it's another piece of the community. And as I said, the Ukrainians, hey, they're sensitive to what's going on with Putin in the Ukraine. Everything in the world, somehow somebody here in Stamford is affected. And I believe it's important that the mayor, whether it be me or anybody else, recognize that they are part of this community, and we know it. So, long-winded answer.
I'm sure the people of Stamford appreciate that. Not a Stamford resident, I did work in Darien, so I spent some time in Stamford, so I definitely have an appreciation for the community here. Wendy, down there in the end, it's Wendy, right?
Yes.
Okay. Wendy is with the League of Women Voters, and one of the things we talked about is the reason you got into League of Women Voters. It was the Newtown shootings, the tragedy that we all know about. I'm wondering, and we talked about a little bit about this, how there's an advocacy angle to some of the things that that one part of the league does versus the nonpartisan part. To what extent does the work that you do, is it affected by this question of, cultural literacy? Are you thinking about that as you kind of do your job, or is that something that just kind of comes and goes?
Yeah, I think about it as a core, constant theme in the league work. One of the things that I would hope that nobody would argue binds us together as Americans is that we see ourselves as a democracy. And the league, one of, their motto is making democracy work. We try to put structures in place on a local level that inform anybody and everybody in the community how to register to vote, everything that you want to know about voting information in terms of access to the ballot, but also providing debates so that people can get to know the candidates and be informed voters, putting together voters' guides, and then also trying to help people understand what the structure is of their government. From a local to state and federal level, if you have a problem that is politically, or legislatively applicable to action, what's the best place to take that to? Does everybody know who their Board of Ed members are? Do you know what the Board of Finance does? What things that the mayor could deal with versus when you have to go to your state rep? Things that state reps can potentially advocate for, as opposed to they can't do anything about it, we need to work at a federal level. And those are all really basic levers of our democracy that I don't think people, get taught in the way that the league can present it to them. So this idea of making democracy work, it only works if, as everybody else is saying, we all participate and have our voices actively using the physical representation of our governmental structure. So yeah, I think about that all the time.
So Stephen, what do you work with homeless youth and just homelessness generally, correct?
Yes.
So I'm wondering for you, kind of listening to some of the themes that are running here, equality, or just like diversity, the value of having a voice, the value of inclusive democracy. How does that work when you're dealing with the homeless who might not even have a voice? How do you feel like you are able to work with them in that context?
Well, homelessness, even here in Lower Fairfield County, is a problem, and I think that's something that a lot of individuals don't realize. Even in the greater United States, 1 in every 3 individuals is in or near poverty. So it's men, it's women, it's children, it's the elderly, it's the sick, it's the mentally ill. It really crosses the whole gamut of different individuals. And when it comes to homelessness, it's not just a matter of the physical issue. If someone is homeless, let's help them find a home. It's breaking that cycle that really is the biggest issue that we focus on. And, that cuts to someone's cultural core. What are their job skills? We have a lot of clients at Inspirica that they didn't grow up in a household where they learned how you dress to go to an interview, how you put together a resume, how you speak when you're asked a question. If your boss says something you don't like, how do you respond to it? So these are all skills that, a lot of us take for granted because we were socialized with those skills growing up, but there are a lot of other individuals that weren't. So, that's one of the big things that Inspirica focuses on, is teaching the skills that will help break the cycle of homelessness. And, that's all part of the acculturation process for individuals. We all come from different backgrounds and need to find a way to make it work in one community. When I first got, I came about this and thinking about these issues, and I'm listed as the Young Professionals Group person for Inspirica. So I was thinking kind of from a millennial standpoint. How does civic and cultural literacy affect the millennial group? And I kind of came to think about our generation and what defines our generation. And I think kind of the bigger events were September 11th and the Great Recession of 2008. And in thinking about those events, really the outpouring of community support that came out of those, neighbors helping neighbors, first responders rushing to the scene, I think that really had a big effect on the millennial generation and the mobilization of millennials to help, to volunteer their time, to join non-for-profits in the area. And the data seems to indicate that millennials are very willing and able to help. That's what everything has shown.
So again, everybody feel free to jump in if you like. We were all asked to come up with a list of the 10 things that we think every American should know. I did that. I think everybody here has done their homework on that. After just kind of hearing a very brief statements from each of us, I would like to ask the panelists and whoever would like to answer, is there something on your specific list that you think the entire panel might have on theirs? Or is there something you think that you might have on your list that nobody else might have and you would like to share?
Well, I'll put something that I think everybody has on their list, or if they don't, they probably just didn't have enough time to remember that among the 6,000 things they want to put on their list. And I actually created 3 lists, and we don't need to get into that why.
They were good lists.
They're all good. They're all good lists. One's Supreme Court rulings that everybody should know. One's economic theories that everybody wants. Others more specific to America. But the Bill of Rights, I believe, sets America apart from the democracies that preceded it and many of the democracies that came after. And it establishes that the government has limited power vis-a-vis the individual. And we debate that issue today in the current election. Gun rights. Does the individual have gun rights, or is the collective right of the community to regulate guns? That comes from the Bill of Rights, and it's a more fundamental debate that basically says in our country the government does not have unfettered rights to do whatever it wants. And I would take that larger meaning is that we believe in economic freedom. Individuals have the right to express themselves. They have right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I believe it is one of the most fundamentally important elements of America that distinguishes us and is part of our great success and is part of a vision or goal that we have not yet achieved in terms of equality for all. So that's on my list, and I'll bet you almost everybody's going to agree, but if you don't, go outside and we'll fight it out.
Yeah, Wendy.
So I had gone to the website and looked at the aggregate of, the top 10 that was coming together. And so I have to say that in reaction to that, I did see that all of those things were up there. And so that influenced me in putting together my list. And I was sort of throwing things in there that I didn't think would be on other people's lists. Some things will be on other people's lists. But one thing that I think has a lot to do with why we're having this conversation I put on the list, and that was how we came to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you read about the history of the Pledge of Allegiance, I bet you do.
Let's see if your answer is the same as what I believe I know.
Yeah, please.
Sorry about that. So I put on my list how we came to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And I think we can debate, I think that there's a stop and start process of how the Pledge of Allegiance came to be, but it really was with the intention, generally, of having a common bonding glue of a very diverse society already, and a recognition in our schools that we needed to purposefully create that common ethic and glue. So.
There's definitely been a controversy over the Pledge of Allegiance because it has the words "under God" in it, and some people would not say it or just leave out that part or say under another, insert the name.
Well, just to be wild, the Pledge of Allegiance was originally written by a socialist or a communist, although that didn't come into being, and the words "under God" were not in there because he didn't want God to be in the pledge.
I think it's very fascinating, and it kind of also feeds into the conversation about the national anthem, which had a phrase in it that was taken out to make it more palatable. Michael, you said you look like you have something to say.
Well, I always have something to say. My wife is over there, and she will tell me to shut up, right? Okay. But certainly with the how certain things come about, the pledge being written by someone that many people politically would want to stand apart from, the national anthem having buried in it some things that we would not want to say today. But it's there. And I guess my part of this is that this is our history, and too often, we as Americans are too afraid to look history in the eye and say what it is, just exactly what it is, without rancor, without trying to cover up. We create these milquetoast stories about what happened, and we wash away the true essence of the struggle that occurred to create this country. If there's something on my list, I would mention, and I shared this with you earlier, that I'd like all Americans to take a look and do some homework on what the Americas looked like in 1491, prior to Columbus arriving here. Because many of us think that he just simply came to these shores and that everything was as it is told to us now. But there are estimates now from folk that there were somewhere between 35 and 50 million people in the Americas at the time that Columbus landed here. And that inside of about 150 years, that 97% of those people who were indigenous here were dead. That's an interesting perspective, though, to understand that about this land that we inhabit now. So I think that every American should start that process of knowing that. I'd also, I love primary sources of history. Something that's written or said contemporaneous to the event that has happened. And as a faithful husband, I would tell you that John Adams received many letters from his wife, Abigail. And that if any student of history would want to learn more about how this country came about, or some of the ins and outs and the political machinations that occurred between the founding fathers, you should take a look at Abigail Adams's letters. At one point, she admonishes her husband, or at least begs him, and by saying, please don't forget the ladies. That the last time you did, you know that men can become tyrants if we allow that to happen. She warned him about watching out for the Virginians, that they were a monstrous sort, boastful, and to the extent that Virginians, which she was right to be concerned, because if you take a look at who were the first 5 or 6 presidents, other than John Adams and John Quincy in some way, all of them were from Virginia. It is because of the power that one colony had. But we wash that part of the story away with Mount Vernon and Jefferson and all these benign types of things. So I've talked too long. My wife forgot to tell me to stop.
It's okay.
Okay.
I'm reminded of it.
But I want to jump in again,
please.
because when Michael says something, I want to react to it.
Okay.
No, they're good things, good things. The danger that I see, and I think it's always been there, and I think it continues, but the way the media has evolved has exacerbated this danger, is something I'll call selective hearing. We hear only what we want to hear. And as we've had new channels of communication, whether it's conservative radio or whether it's MSNBC, which I personally happen to like and think is very truthful, or as it's Fox News, which is not fair and balanced, but, that's my little commentary.
NPR.
But the point is that we have this selective hearing. And it extends to, we can't look at history, and if somebody says something we don't agree with, we don't actually look to find out what the truth is. We look to discredit the individual or cut them out of our communication. And if you talk about trying to build a common culture, which I think is just about impossible, but we have got to, as human beings, have got to be able to hear things that are not part of our awareness, not part of what we agree with, and we have to be willing to listen to that. And I would tell you that's a huge danger in this concern that we're becoming much more extremist. I would say we now have channels of communication that now tell people exactly what they want to hear. And here's a new segment where I can go even further out onto the spectrum. And I think it is pulling us apart in ways that are unimaginable. But it's when you said we have trouble sometimes looking history square in the face. We want to hear a different story, and we do not hear what the truth is. We're unwilling to accept it, and that is a huge challenge across our species in America.
Wendy.
One of the other things on my list, and I think it plays a little bit off of what Michael said also, is trying to find really interesting human stories, and whether it's an actual piece of literature or just a general topic to explore, that helps us understand the complexity of the situations and why things happened, maybe not necessarily the way we would have hoped they would, but moved us forward nonetheless. And one of the things on my list was the friendship between Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. And these stories of our past that sometimes there are stories where you say, it was so horrible that happened. Why did that happen? When you look to the very human stories, you oftentimes will find that people and the way that they knew each other influenced the way things played out, and you understand how important it is then to reach out to people in your community and make sure that everybody is in the conversation together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think, though, Wendy, that...
Could you speak into the microphone, Dr.
I'm
Tim?
sorry.
Thank you.
I think, Wendy, that the example you gave can be used to support the mayor's perspective. The friendship between Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass, from one perspective, could be taken one way. From another perspective, serves as confirmation of a bias that group has. And so that very good example, to the mayor's point, is distorted and amplified. The distortion is amplified by our media. Which brings to mind that something that maybe every American should know, and it's one of those Chomsky quotes about the manufacture of consent is a revolution in the art of democracy. The manufacture of consent is a revolution in the art of democracy. The idea, I think he was talking about propaganda at the time, but it is what our media has become almost. It's propaganda on different sides. Unfortunately, they're manufacturing consent with groups that are acutely interested in particular beliefs, and I call them beliefs because there's not necessarily evidence behind them. And it is one of the great dangers. I think Carrie, as she was introducing it, was talking about the challenges that we have with the fragmentation that's occurring in our society. That's a very real danger for us today.
Bianca, did you want to say something?
Yes, I mean, in relation to that, I do believe that reality has authors, that we kind of invent our own myth and our own realities. And in relation to what you were saying, Mike, I believe we should know more about where we came from and why. So it's about the history and context of U.S. immigration and trying to discern what are the myths and what are the reality of that, and it's in relation to what you were mentioning, that we have to really understand where we're coming from and kind of get out what the media is putting out there. So that is not necessarily the truth.
Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah, and in just talking about this biases issue, one of the ones that I had on my list was the O.J. Simpson trial. And as a lawyer, I think it's fascinating now. You know, there have been a lot of documentaries about it, but looking back, and you know, I view evidence one way as an attorney, but you have evidence that was presented publicly on a day-to-day basis. You had, you know, CNN, that may have been the only news network at the time, presenting their take, and then you had, you know, white people who were polled saying 90% guilty. You had African Americans polled saying 90% innocent. And it just goes to show the same evidence was presented in the same manner to two very different segments of the population, and both were absolutely convinced that they knew he was guilty or he was innocent. I just think it's fascinating.
And I think as a media person, noticing the nuances there, that the thought of innocence was more of a social movement than an actual thought of innocence.
Right.
I think, you know, the black community wanted him to be innocent because so many black people have been put behind bars for so many years for nothing. They felt this could be some kind of vindication or some kind of win. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody disagrees with me, but that was kind of my understanding of where that change came from. I think we do have to, do you have questions? Right. Right. Did everybody hear that? She was saying that his lawyer, Johnny Cochran, I'm assuming, yes, was representing him extremely well, and that had a big influence on people's perceptions of what happened. Do we want to get to small group? Is it,
Yeah.
or do you want to, how do you guys want to, no, we're kind of over time at this.
We can take one or two questions.
Yeah, do we want to take some questions? Sure.
Right?
No, well, I was just going to also add that it was believed that there was such years and years of systemic abuse by the LAPD against the
Right.
African American community. So.
Right. That was a big part of it.
And any other questions?
I know I'm old when I say this, but how many of us remember when news was required that both sides be presented on TV? You know, it was fair and balanced, both, you know, in the newspapers, and it was a ruling, or I guess a regulation that the FCC had, that news had to be presented both sides of the story.
Correct.
So people could make their own decision on what they felt was true and right. But we don't, then that changed, and now so you have to, if you, like David said, you know, you watch the station that says what you like. You aren't forced to read and to see and to hear both sides of a story, which I think is too bad.
As a media representative, very quickly, I find you have to be somewhat of a masochist to do this job, because you know that the work that we're doing is under scrutiny. You know that it's powerful, and you know that you better get it right, and if you don't get it right, you better own up to it. I take it very personally, not just my profession, I take it very personally because of how it's perceived, and I get really angry that there are media outlets out there that don't take it upon themselves to get the other side. I think there is a sense of judgment that needs to be made. For example, covering Donald Trump has been a real challenge for media because they don't know how to adequately cover a man who's said the things that he said, being fair. That's posed a good challenge because to the extent that you are fair, you also have to use judgment. But we are absolutely open to criticism, and I'm sometimes ashamed to be part of this industry, but I take it upon myself to try to not continue that or perpetuate that. Do we have any other questions?
Could Could I throw in one thing on the line of of access to information? I was doing a bit of pandering on my list to my friend Alice, and I put Carnegie Libraries on my list because, this idea that we created a space where people can access the information themselves, get straight to, the sources, is an extremely valuable thing. And the fact that our libraries are, such a core community space for us, I thought that was, when we talk about access to information, it's a really important part of that conversation.
Libraries. Amen for libraries.
I didn't pay her.
Sorry?
Benjamin Franklin was the began our libraries. It was his idea.
Yes.
Benjamin Franklin. He also, I think, he was one of the original columnists, too, at one of the first newspapers.
Yeah, as a Franklin and Marshall College graduate, I think I get the last word on that, and certainly he was. There were many other things that Franklin did, and the library being one of them. And I think it's a fabulous thing that, over 250 years later, we are still using public libraries because they are for the public good. We need to make more of a use of them, but we also need to recognize, you mentioned the way you receive your news and where people get their information. There's a generation that is behind, or two generations behind many of us, who don't watch network news or MSNBC or Fox or the others. They get their news strictly from the internet. And that's why it's so important that T.S. Eliot, we're all old enough here, T.S. Eliot once said that every American should be given or have a foolproof, fail-safe bullshit detector available so that when you hear something that is not accurate, that an alarm would go off. There is so much on the internet that is just plain drivel that if we don't educate our folks how to obtain information, how to analyze it, and how to understand what they're reading or hearing about, that is the makeup for fear and anger, unbridled fear and anger, that when those two characters ride together, there's oppression for someone that comes up afterwards. So we need to be mindful of that in a democratic republic, that the access to news and information and the ability to analyze it is just as important.
Do you have another question? Somebody in the back?
One kind of quick thing, a little bit of I'm quite new to the area, and but kind of a little bit of a white elephant sometimes is, but something I think everybody mentioned, it touches on an issue everyone mentioned, is mental illness in the United States, and it affects homelessness, education, and so yeah, mental illness, just education and what's being done in Stamford and what can be done more to help get things we can do better understood. Because once there's more awareness, I think if people have more compassion, kindness, because there's about 80 of us here, 70, 80, they say it affects 1 in 4. We all know someone, and then and then so even there's buzzing now I hear going on around me. So how do we in each group, how do we make this work, and then across the board? Thanks.
It's a powerful question, complicated question with a complicated answer. Wendy, I mean, certainly work in gun violence, there's a mental health component to that.
Oh, that's a can of
No?
worms.
Yeah, it is. Michael, or does anybody else want to? I mean, it's a very complicated question. I mean, certainly the state of Connecticut has been looking at it. There's task force established. Stamford, I'm not sure what Stamford has done, Mayor or Superintendent Kim, and it's...
We're opposed to gun violence.
That's a good thing.
And the studies show that people with mental health challenges or issues are no more likely to commit violence. In fact, they're less likely to commit violence, and that they are more likely to self-harm, to harm themselves. So I I do work a lot in the gun violence prevention area, and when anybody sort of conflates that, I knee-jerk reaction to try to split those subjects.
Well, that's a great point, because that's an argument that is made often, that it's not about gun control. No, I guess gun advocates would say it's not about gun control, it's about mental health awareness, which is important. So separating those two is probably more important from your perspective.
I think we're a little off topic.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I could talk to you about it afterward.
Right. Well, it's a very complicated question, because I don't think there is an answer, really, to the extent that it's people are made aware of it is important. I think that's my job, right? Making sure people are aware of mental health. Does anybody in the audience have anything to add to that, or expansion on that, or questions related to that? Or any other questions? Do you want to do the small group? Yeah, let's go to small group. Okay, so what we're going to do is everybody is seated in circles, obviously. If you see a circle that doesn't have that many people and you would like to join that circle, feel free to do that. If not, stay where you are. But we're going to continue this conversation in a small group, and then we're going to come back and discuss what we've been talking about in small groups. So
About 20 minutes.
okay, so about 20 minutes.
And you have the questions in front of you that we'll actually ask.
Right. So the questions will be certainly anything that we've talked about you can expand on, but the main question really is, what does civic and cultural literacy mean to you in your life, in your public life, in your professional life, in your personal life? What are some ways that our changing society influences life in Stamford? What are some challenges and opportunities that come with this flux? How do you or your people in your community help address these challenges and opportunities to create a more inclusive culture? And the big question, what are the 10 things that you think every American should know? So I know I had a lot of trouble whittling it down to 10. I know everybody on the panel had that problem. So just feel free to engage in discussions. The panelists are going to be joining the group, so I'd ask the panelists to pick a group if you like, or if you don't, you can more than welcome to hang out up here. But I think they would appreciate that.
Lucky group gets you.
I'm more than happy to join also.
I think you know the way to go.
That's smart or dumb, but it's clearly not in the middle.
But well thought, either way.
Well, it's I could just go on.
About David's going to lead the discussion, but what I'm hearing is that, especially now since everybody is still talking, is that these dialogues are rich. So after we end this discussion, there's cookies, fresh cookies brought out here, there's coffee, and I encourage you to stay and enjoy these conversations.
A very diverse set of cookies, I might add.
There is a diverse set of cookies, the mayor is telling me, so that's a good thing. We had a great conversation over here in the middle. A lot of the things we talked about music, the importance of music. We were talking about immigration, the importance for there to be, for immigrants to feel that they're connected, not just superficially, but on a deeper level with the culture here. Those are some interesting things that came up. We talked a little bit about voting, not voting. World religions, the consensus was that religion should be taught more than just the big three monotheistic religions, that more religions should be incorporated into education.
Yeah.
Into education, public education. Public education, correct.
Religion should be included in public education.
Well, a wide variety of religions, more than just the main three. I know when I was in school, we learned about Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, but we didn't talk about Buddhism. We didn't talk about all the other ones. So, anybody want to share anything that they thought was insightful or helpful during your discussion? Anybody?
Oh,
You have a hand over here?
How much time do I have? Never mind. Sorry. Never mind.
10 seconds.
I'm a pastor. I could go on for a while. My wife wouldn't let me. We had a very rich discussion with Dr. Kim here about education. But the thing that I want to mention is something dear to my heart, which is that I noticed that there are no clergy on the panel tonight. Oh, are you a clergyman?
Yes, I am.
Sorry. Okay, I'm glad. Are there any clergy, any other clergy in the congregation here? Only myself.
This became your.
Well, there was one mention of God in the Pledge of Allegiance, but there wasn't otherwise in the original discussion anything about the role of the church. And I just wanted, when I think about what every American should know, it is the role of the church in American history. And there hasn't been much discussion about that tonight. And the role of history, the role of the church in American history is profound. And one example might be that most of the towns in the state of Connecticut were founded by churches, including the town of Stamford. In 1641, more than 100 years before the American Revolution, this town was founded by the First Congregational Church, which is right up the street here with the rainbow flag on it. My church. I've been a member there for 35 years. I'm not the pastor there. But the role of churches and religion in American history would be first on my list.
Very well said. Anybody have any comments or responses to back here?
Oh, yes.
Yes, you do.
However, we should also emphasize the importance of the separation of church and state, which we abide by.
So the separation of church and state. Also, the importance of the church throughout history.
We had some conversation about speaking English, and that in relation to immigrants and being the importance of, in Stamford Neighbors Link and in other places, other organizations that help people that are coming to a country to learn the language of the country. I would say that that is just one example of needing to speak a common language in a very abstract way of what every American should know. We need to be speaking a common language, and I think that that was a reflection of that. And this need that we have, and I don't think that in our country we have any universal support for creating that common language when people come to us.
I can take care of this half of the room.
All right, I'll take this half.
I agree that we should have a common knowledge. I agree we should have a common language, no doubt about it. It makes things a lot easier. But we all talk about it, but nobody wants to spend the money to teach these immigrants how to speak English. We put them into ghettos and say they're not as good as we are because they don't speak English, and we let it go. I mean, it costs money to educate people, and that's where we should be spending money, not on tanks and guns.
So redlining, real estate redlining, definitely something that's had an impact on culture. Anka.
Yes, I would say that it's not only money, but it's engaging the community to do so. At Neighbors Link, we have over 500 volunteers coming to teach English and mentor computer literacy or digital literacy and financial literacy. So it is not only the money that comes from the state, but what every member of the community can do about that.
I wonder if anybody here thinks that we should be a dual language country, because by 2040, it's expected that Hispanic-speaking people will be the dominant ethnic group in the United States. So should we be a dual language speaking country? Yes?
Yeah, well, most Western countries require, I think Germany, France, they all study English in school, and most everyone there, I mean, everyone I've encountered can speak English, and it's embarrassing how some countries, they can't, when Americans travel, they just expect everyone to know English, and people do, but the reverse isn't true. So
I would say one of my dreams for Stanford is for our children to be multilingual. I think with our diversity, that there's no reason why our kids shouldn't be speaking 3 or 4 languages by the time they graduate high school. I don't know that there needs to be something national, but if you're going to speak about the opportunity in this town, they have friends who speak, what did we say, 35 different languages. There's no reason at, when they play on the playground, they can't play Foursquare in Spanish on Mondays and learn Tagalog, on Fridays. And so I don't know that needs to be like a national thing, but I think we have such a huge opportunity with the diversity we have in Stanford, but why would we limit ourselves with just 2 languages?
So language, language, definitely important issue. What other things did we talk about in the groups that you guys want to share? So we got language, religion, separation of church and state. What kind of interesting, yeah.
One of the points we made was talking about that our history needs to be written not only from the point of view of the victors, but the point of view of the vanquished, because that is history, not just the history of the people who succeeded, but also the history of those who were either subjugated or vanquished. And that is something that Mike Hyman referred to, is the whitewashing of history, which then denies the true history of our past and helps us to understand and be inclusive in our understanding of what makes America great and where our challenges still remain.
This was number 1 on my list. I probably shouldn't share it because it will immediately peg me as my political beliefs. But the number 1 thing on my list was the book, The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which I think is exactly that. It's a history from those who have been vanquished. And there's a great Robert the Bruce quote, history was written by those who have hanged heroes. Not exactly the same, but memorable. Anybody else have something they want to share?
There's also a book, History of Losers, but we won't be teaching that one. So I've taken notes, and we're going to teach multiple languages, religion, citizenship and civics, different narratives of the history of our people, and we're going to do the things that we currently do. And by the way, we do our largest program in our adult learning, in our adult school, is the English language program. So that is funded in part by our taxpayers, but in large part actually by the federal government. So that money does come down. But I think I'll leave you with a quote that Larry Kremen, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian at Columbia, wrote. And it's a little book called Education and Its Discontents. And in it he said, if there is a crisis in American schooling, it is not the crisis of putative mediocrity and decline charged or manufactured, in my words, by the recent reports, but rather the crisis inherent in balancing this tremendous variety of demands Americans have made on their schools and colleges, of crafting curricula that take account of the needs of a modern society at the same time that they make provision for the extraordinary diversity of America's young people, of designing institutions where well-prepared teachers can teach under supportive conditions and where all students can be motivated and assisted to develop their talents to the fullest, and of providing the necessary resources for creating and sustaining, in my words, the vibrancy of such institutions. It is the challenge of our schools to do all the things that we're currently doing because somebody has asked us to do it, to do all the additional things that people are asking us to do, all well-intentioned and right if we had the time. We have these students for 11% of the time from the time they're 0 to 18. they're elsewhere for the other part of their lives from 0 to 18. So it's going to take more than just the schools to do this. And at the same time, he touches on the needs of the students to express themselves, to develop their own interests and talents and passions. And if we layer on layer of required coursework, we diminish the amount of time the children have to learn their own identity. So it's just a challenge that I share with you. It is something I think every American should know. Along with our schools are not failing. That never has educational attainment been higher in this country. And because that's such an important correlate of personal well-being and economic growth in this country, I think that's great news, something to celebrate. So despite the narrative that we hear, the trope, I think Stamford in particular should be especially proud of its schools.
And as somebody who covers schools, very well said. I get frustrated with this narrative because I'm going to schools that are successful all the time. And I feel like media, definitely, the headlines are generally negative because people tend to consume negative news at a greater rate than they consume not negative news. If it bleeds, it leads.
Is the advocate here? There you go.
All right.
Is there anybody bleeding?
That'll be the front page story.
Have a murder here.
There we go. They'd be right here.
I would just like, actually, I think Dr. Kim should have the last word in a way because he was in our group and you sort of pulled it together. But we were very fortunate to have him because he could be the sort of the target of everything has to happen in the school. And I think what you've just said is everything can't happen in the school. I came tonight with a desire to talk about, I read recently, unless we have a common memory, we will not heal as a country. And I think what Michael said about the history of what happened to the Native Americans, what's happened to every group that's been oppressed, that's in our DNA. And we have become the country we are on the backs of the people that we've oppressed. And I think that, I'm still learning and I'm old and I shouldn't be just finding these things out. But then I have to go to the place that says I'm also responsible for educating others. And that's where it's all our responsibility to help us know what that common memory is so that we can be healed. Because if there's ever a time that our country has needed healing, it's now. And I really liked what Mayor Martin said, that anything that happens in the world, there's a place in Stamford that feels that. And so we are really blessed to be in the city that we are because we have a chance to model what needs to happen in other communities. Thank you.
Yeah. I often come across teachers and I ask them the same question. To what extent do you feel like you are now a nurse, you are now a father or mother, that you are now a social worker because of all the rising demands that schools are being charged with? And I met Johanna Hayes, who is the National Teacher of the Year, and she's from Waterbury. And one of the things she talks about is this idea of it's not just a school's job to raise kids. It takes a village, it takes community effort, it takes nonprofits, it takes businesses coming together and working with kids to educate them on these very complicated issues. So I think a lot of people, there's a fledgling movement geared toward more inclusive education rather than just throwing everything at the schools, which seems to be a popular trend. Does anybody else want to pick up on that theme or have anything else they wanted to discuss?
Well, I'd like to mention something. Yeah. A few years back, a long time ago, someone said, if you look back at your life, what would you like to change or do over? And I'm certain that we all probably have things that we would change or do over. But as I've grown and matured, I've felt that, boy, if I changed anything, that would also change something else about me. The pains that I may have felt, at doing or struggling with something. The anger and rage that I may have had about something, that I look back on it now and I can reflect what that was. I also feel now that there is nothing. I mean, even those bad moments, that they somehow hardened or made me better or smarter. And the reason why I mention that is that as a nation on our history, we shouldn't want to change or remove or dismiss any of what has happened to this country in its long journey to be here today. It's what has made us who we are. And there's something that is strengthening, that is like a fire that's been burned in the steel, or the steel that's been burned in the fire, and it's stronger now because of it. One of the 10 things that I think that people should know, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I can't read it anymore without crying, actually, but it's Maya Angelou's poem, On the Pulse of Morning, because it includes everyone. But you have to know the history of this country to read that poem, to truly understand it. And I think that that's one of those things that we should not look at slavery, at the massacre of the Indians as something that we want to put away and not talk about it with anyone. Because when we do, it makes us better. There are lessons to be learned from this stuff. And that if we are ever able to move on, we would address those things head on. And not be afraid to talk about them.
I would ask you to read the poem, but I'm assuming you probably... Would you like to? It's up to you.
I don't have the poem with me, but...
You don't have it by memory?
I don't have it by memory, but I do... Well, here's a portion. Would you... Do you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The river sings and sings on. There's a true yearning to respond to the singing river and the wise rock, to say the Asian, the Hispanic, the Jew, the African, the Native American, the Sioux, the Catholic, the Muslim, the French, the Greek, the Irish, the rabbi, the priest, the sheik, the gay, the straight, the preacher, the privileged, the homeless, the teacher. They all hear the speaking of the tree. Today, the first and the last of every tree speaks to humankind. Come to me, here beside the river. Plant yourself beside me, here beside the river. Each of you, a descendant of some passed on traveler, has been paid for. You who gave me my first name, the Pawnee, the Apache, and Seneca. Your Cherokee nation who rested with me, then forced on bloody feet, left me to the employment of other seekers, desperate for gain, starving for gold. You, the Turk, the Swede, the German, the Scot, you, the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Kru, bought, sold, stolen, arriving on a nightmare, praying for a dream. Here, root yourself beside me. I am the tree planted by the river, which will not be moved. I, the rock, the river, I, the tree, I am yours. Your passage has been paid for. Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for the bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its retching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon the day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the shape of your most private need. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for new beginnings. Do not be wedded forever to fear, yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering you space to place new steps of change. Here on the pulse of this fine day, you may have the courage to look up and out upon me, the rock, the river, the tree, your country, no less to Midas than the mendicant, no less to you now than the mastodon then. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning.
Wow.
Yeah. So